Afternoon again. Thank you for joining today's multi-state alternate assessment, test administrator, and test coordinator training for this school year. My name is Michael Craig, and I serve as the assessment specialist for special populations at OSSE. So today we will take a high-level overview of testing procedures for new MSAA test administrators and test coordinators. As a reminder, this training is not required. However, we will discuss what trainings are required for test administrators and test coordinators in order to prepare for the MSAA testing. Also, please complete the chat. There is a link complete the sign in the link in the chat. Again, before you exit the training, make sure you sign in, and there is a link in the chat. Again, please mute yourself throughout the presentation and turn off your camera just to save bandwidth. We have a large audience today, which we're excited about. So we just want to make sure that everyone has access to the training. And also, if you have questions throughout the chat, please feel free to use the chat throughout the presentation. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat feature. So again, today we will take a few minutes to just discuss high-level procedures for new test administrators and test coordinators for MSAA. All right, so our agenda will first begin with an overview of MSAA, followed by testing procedures for before, during, and after testing. All right, so most of you may know, but just as a overview and just to frame our presentation for today, the purpose of the MSAA is to ensure that all students are able to participate in an assessment that measures what they know and can do in relation to grade level state content standards. MSAA also ensures that students with significant cognitive disabilities achieve increasingly higher academic outcomes and level high school prepared for post-secondary outcomes. And finally, the MSAA meets the requirements of the Every Student Succeed Act and IDEA, which require the participation of all students in assessments designed to measure students' knowledge and the ability on grade level content standards. The most important thing to remember about the MSAA is that in order for a student to participate, they must have a significant cognitive disability that is documented in their IEP. The MSAA is for students in grades 3 through 8, 11, and C3. And it is assessed in the areas of ELA, which is made up of reading and writing, as well as mathematics. MSAA is also aligned to Common Core state standards, and it measures the MSAA core content connectors. MSAA is also administered on a one-to-one basis, and it must be administered by a trained test administrator. And we will talk about the required trainings in a few slides. Also, just highlighting that grades 3 through 8 and 11 and C3, some of our LEAs have students they are in C3 level, which is their third year of certificate track. So if your student is on a certificate track in high school, it must be their third year of the certificate track, which corresponds to the 11th grade. Students can participate in the MSAA in 3 modes of administration. You have your computer-based administration or laptop. You have your paper-based administration, and you have a hybrid administration. For students that require a paper-based administration, TAs may print a PDF version of the test from the MSAA system for students if they require that paper-based administration. So a great design feature of the assessment is its stage adaptiveness. The assessment is in ELA and mathematics, and it allows the students to interact with items that will more accurately reflect the student's abilities. So in both ELA and mathematics, the student begins with stage 1 on their session 1. And once they complete session 1, it will determine what version of session 2 the student will advance to. So they will either advance to version A, B, or C based on their performance in session 1. So this allows the students to demonstrate their ability and receive items that will most likely and most accurately reflect their ability level. The assessment is also made up of different types of items. The assessment begins with your selected response items in ELA and mathematics. These are your standard multiple choice items. There are also constructed response items in mathematics. These are your short answer. And then you have your writing prompts in ELA for students to compose and respond to a specific writing prompt. It is also recommended that the students begin the assessment in the ELA selected response, just to ensure that they have enough time to complete the assessment. All right, so now that we've taken a look at the makeup of the assessment, now we're going to dive into procedures for before, during, and after testing. Before I switch to each section, I will stop and just review the chat to see if there are any pertinent questions that can be answered immediately. All right, so now let's take a look at what test administrators need to do before testing students in MSAA. So the test administrators and test coordinators will receive a welcome email from MSAA Service Center with their login credentials. So this is a screenshot of what the MSAA email will look like. It will come from cognia.org. Cognia is the vendor for the MSAA. So once you receive this email, you will click on the welcome link to join access to the system. You must create a welcome. You must create a password for you, and just remember that this email expires it expires in 24 hours. So once you receive this email, please log in and create your account. Cognia will create accounts for LEA test coordinators by February 25th. So no later than February 25th, LEA test coordinators will receive this email from Cognia so they can create their account. LEA coordinators are responsible for creating accounts for school test coordinators, and your school test coordinators are responsible for creating accounts for the test administrators. So LEA coordinators, you're the first one to receive your account, and you should receive your email no later than February 25th. And just to remember that LEA TCs are responsible for creating accounts for their school TCs and TAs if necessary, or they can assign that to their school TAs, TCs to create their school TA accounts. Here's just a snapshot of what the MSAA system looks like. If you've never administered the assessment before, this is the home page where you will log in. You can access the MSAA through msaassessment.org. Also, when you first log in, there is a test security agreement that will appear. All TAs and TCs must agree to the test security agreement in order to gain full access to the MSAA system. If you do not agree to the test security agreement, you will not be able to administer the assessment.
Hey, Mike, sorry to interrupt. There's a question or two questions in the chat. They're the same question.
Okay.
About who creates, sets up accounts for non-public schools.
Great. We actually will be talking about that, but sure. The non-publics. So LEA test coordinators are responsible for creating accounts for non-publics. When we submit submit sites to MSAA and to Cognia to create the accounts, Non-publics are associated with specific LEAs. So I know there are multiple non-publics that are associated with multiple LEAs, or the same non-public may be associated with multiple LEAs. So the LEA test coordinator is responsible for reaching out to the non-public to ensure that the account has been created. There may be an instance where the account has already been created by another LEA. So let's say I'm working at a non-public, and I have students that attend E.L. Haynes, but I also have students that attend DC Public Schools. E.L. Haynes may have already created my account, which is fine. And you should that non-public TC should already have access to both schools on their account. So again, the LEA TC is responsible for reaching out and making sure that the test coordinator has an account. And it is also the LEA's responsibility to ensure that the non-public is administering the assessment to their students at that specific non-public. Great question.
So Michael, should we then, as a non-public test coordinator, expect to hear from the LEAs like after did you say it was the 25th?
Correct, the 25th. Now, however, to be proactive, I would recommend not just waiting for the LEA to reach out to you. As the non-public, take it upon yourself to reach out to that LEA to say, I haven't received an account yet. Can you set up my account for me?
Okay. And can we submit our test security plans before that happens? Because I was needed to have mine in like before even the 25th in order to meet when I wanted to start doing the other assessments.
So test security plans will need to be submitted through the test security application, and they will be due 15 days prior to the date of testing, the first testing date that you put on your plan. But if you need to, as long as you have access, you can submit the test security plan.
Okay, I don't have to have my accounts all set up with MSAA first.
Right, correct.
Okay,
so
thank you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Great questions. All right, so just a reminder, so once you log in to the MSAA system, then you need to download the following items. So these 3 items are very important that you will need to download. These will help you throughout the test administration. So first you're going to download the test administration manual. The TAM provides you with an outline, just guidelines of testing procedures, all information that you need during testing. You'll also download the directions for test administration, also known as the DTA. These are your directions for administering the assessment. You will need these with you when you are administering the assessment, and you need to read the DTA verbatim when you're administering the assessment to the students. And then finally, you will download the MSAA online assessment user guide for test administrators. There's a user guide for test administrators, and there's also one for test coordinators. You only need to download the one for the role that you are serving in. So again, these 3 documents should stay with you during the entire time of administration. So you can download, you will be able to see these as soon as you log into the system and just download them, print them, whatever you need, however you need to access them. All right, so in the back of the test administration manual, also known as the TAM, there are 2 checklists. One is for test administrators and the other is for test coordinators. Both checklists are broken into before, during, and after testing sections. This is your key resource when when administering the assessment. So throughout the administration, you need to have this document as well. This provides you with steps that you need to take before, during, and after testing to make sure that you successfully complete the administration. So some examples of what is broken up into each section. For test administrators, before testing, you will need to complete the student profile, which we will talk about a little later. Also, during testing, you will need to follow the DTA as well as the accommodations. And then after testing, you will submit your test, complete the accommodations, and complete the end of test survey. So each checklist goes into detail, but these are some areas that are highlighted that you will need to complete as a test administrator before, during, and after testing. There's also a checklist, as I mentioned, for test coordinators. You can see that the checklist for test administrators is green and the checklist for test coordinators is orange. So that's how you know they differ. And then they have different tasks on there. So your school test coordinator, if you're serving in that role, you will need to, before testing, set up test security and confidentiality forms, as well as some technology requirements. During testing, you will monitor the administration, maintain security, maintain and ensure that all tests have been submitted. And then after testing, again, make sure the tests are submitted, shred all secure materials, and submit test security affidavits to LEA. So again, once you have access to the system, you download all the materials, and then in the TAM, these two checklists are located in the back of the TAM. If you're serving in a school like a smaller LEA and you're serving as the LEA test coordinator and the test administrator, these two resources will be for you. So you'll just be playing dual roles. All right, so again, so after you download the checklist, you will need to complete the required modules and training. So as I mentioned in the beginning of this webinar, there are required trainings that test administrators and test coordinators must take before they are allowed to administer the assessment. So again, test administrators must complete all MSAA test administration training modules. The modules will be available in the MSAA system on February 28th. The modules will be available throughout the test window. So you don't have to just take it on the 28th. It opens for test administrators and test coordinators on the 28th, but you have the entire test window to take the online modules, to view the online modules and take the quiz. All TAs must complete the final quiz with at least an 80% accuracy or higher, and TCs must complete all test administration modules, but do not need to complete the final quiz. So that differs. TCs, you complete the modules, but don't have to take the quiz. TAs, you complete the modules and you have to take the final quiz. So the online test administration training modules for TAs will highlight information from the test administration manual, which is one of the resources that I highlighted earlier, as well as the directions for test administration and the user guide. So those three documents that I highlighted and discussed earlier as your key resources for this administration, you should definitely review those because this is what the training modules will be made up of, and essentially what the quiz at the end will be made up as well. So you see there are a total of 6 modules, which will end up being about 2.5 hours of training. So again, similar to the test administration training modules, the test coordinator modules will cover the same thing, what's in the TAM, and then the user guide for the test coordinators. The modules for test administrators and test coordinators are the same except for module 5. And as for test coordinators, you can see creating and managing users in classrooms. That's the different module for test coordinators. And again, test coordinator training will equal about 2.5 hours of time as well. All right, so test administrators, I touched on this earlier, but one of the tasks that you will need to complete before testing is to review demographic information for each student to ensure that it is correct. So IC has registered those students that were identified as students with significant cognitive disability and were deemed eligible for alternate assessment participation. Before administering the assessment, test administrators just need to confirm that the student demographic information is correct. So the student ID, the USI, student first name, last name, date of birth, all of that information is correct to ensure that when the student receives their ISRs or their scores at the end of administration, that it is going to the correct students. So again, after you take your training, you will learn how to view this demographic page in the system and review those demographic information for those students. If there are changes that need to be made, you will need to contact your school test coordinator in order to do so. Along with the demographic information, the TA must complete all fields in the Student Learner Characteristic Inventory, also known as the LCI. This data information in the LCI provides a description of the educational, communication, and linguistic characteristics of that student. So this is honestly consortium level data that we collect and is used by all the states in the MSAA to use when creating the assessment. So some of the LCI information, it talks about the primary disability, the primary language, and how the student communicates. So these are important data sources that are used for the entire consortium. So definitely make sure that the LCI is correct and relates to this specific student that you're administering for. And finally,
Michael, sorry, before we move on, there's a few questions building up in the chat and was wondering if before we move on, we can address those.
Oh yeah, sure, absolutely.
So one of the questions was just about access to these slides and recording. And just wanted to note that both the slides and the recording will be posted on OSSE's website within a few days after this session.
Yes.
Another question is about access to the training modules. Will the links be provided in the test administrator manual, or will there be a separate email sent to folks?
Okay, so once you receive your email from Cognia, that is the testing vendor, you log in with your credentials, you create your password, you accept the test security agreement, and then you will be able to see the modules. So the modules will be built into the platform.
And then another question about non-public responsibilities. Do non-publics enter the student demographics and the LCI, or does the LEA complete that task?
No, the non-public test administrator will be responsible for that.
Great, thanks. And then let me just scroll back. I think there was one final question I think is a little bit broader. The question was, what are we doing for the kids who have severe cognitive disabilities? So maybe just some explanation of MSAA
Sure.
and its purpose.
Yeah, so just to take a step back, the MSAA, Multi-State Alternate Assessment, is designed for students with significant cognitive disabilities. So in order to participate in this assessment, the student must be determined eligible by OSSE and have a significant cognitive disability that is documented in their IEP. So a significant cognitive disability can come in many forms and look different for each student, but some examples could be a student with autism, a student with an intellectual disability, a student with multiple disabilities as well. So it is only designed for those students with significant cognitive disabilities. The assessment is designed to meet the needs of those students. If a student is not prepared to test that day, the test administrator can pause the assessment, or they don't even have to start it for that day. Essentially, whenever the student is ready and best prepared to take the assessment, that's when the test administrator can begin that assessment. MSAA is very flexible. You have the entire test window to complete the assessment for that student. Students can participate in the MSAA as many sessions or the least amount of sessions they need. If a student logs on and takes the test for 5 minutes and is not prepared to move on to the next test question, that's completely fine. You can log on multiple times a day. You can log on one time a week if necessary, but it's completely up to you. So again, the assessment is designed specifically for those students with significant cognitive disabilities. Again, so these are great questions. Continue to drop them in the chat, and I will make sure we address them as needed. The last step that test administrators must take before administering the assessment is entering the accommodations. So these are It's a section within the system, the student demographic page that talks about what accommodations are being used by the student. So these are some examples of accommodations that are available to students on the assessment. So assistive technology, paper version, scribe, sign language, things of that nature. But remember, if a student has an accommodation on their IEP and they require that on a statewide assessment, and specifically for MSAA, they are allowed to have that accommodation because, again, this assessment is designed for those students with significant cognitive disabilities, and they may have a number of accommodations on their IEP that are not listed in the on this page specifically, but those students are still entitled to those accommodations. All right, so we went over procedures to follow before testing. Stephanie, let's look in the chat. Are there any other questions before we switch to during testing procedures?
Yes, there were a couple. One question was about just account creation in general, and I think understanding at the building level, if you're the special education coordinator, are you creating accounts for test administrators, or how are those accounts being created, or does it depend on the
Okay,
LEA?
so it depends. So this webinar is designed for test administrators at the building level. So those teachers, staff that will be administering the assessment to the student, and test coordinators on the building, the LEA level and the building level. So the test coordinator, either on the LEA level or the building level, is responsible for creating the accounts for the test administrator. So that just depends on the makeup of your LEA and the size of your LEA. Test coordinators on the LEA level will be the first ones to receive their account from Cognia no later than February 25th. And they are responsible for creating the account, the test coordinator account, either on the building level or the test administrator. It just depends on the level and the size of your LEA.
Great. And then another question that may be LEA specific, but I can try to tackle it as well. So the question is, in the past, parents have been able to submit written notification that their child does not have permission to participate in PARC or MSAA, and those notifications were honored. Will that be the case again this year with MSAA? And so I can give a little bit of information about that.
Okay.
At the state level, PARC and MSAA are statewide required assessments, and there is no policy for acknowledging students not taking the assessment because it's part of the public education, and it's part of a regular instructional school day. So at the OSCE level, there are no policies or procedures to not participate in the statewide assessments. The only exception is a assessment medical exemption, where a student is unable to participate in instructional activities due to a medical condition, and that form is available on the OSCE website and needs to be signed by a physician and by the LEA. That being said, while there are not state policies about how these are handled, I would suggest that you connect with your LEA test coordinator about if there are any LEA specific policies, if parents are requesting that their students not participate in the required statewide assessments. I hope that answered that question. I know that it's somewhat vague only because there may be different policies across LEAs, and so I don't want to speak to any specific LEA's policy. But from the OSCE statewide perspective, there is not a policy or procedure to request not to participate in statewide assessments. The only exception is if a student receives a medical exemption for statewide testing. Those were all the questions, I believe, in the chat, Mike, so you can go ahead and keep going.
All right, great. Thanks, Stephanie. So now that we've discussed testing procedures to take before testing, we're going to switch and discuss what needs to happen during testing. All right, so one of the biggest things that our test administrators and test coordinators need to remember is to ensure test security. Maintaining a secure testing environment includes, but is not limited to, restricting student access to resources that are explicitly identified in the DTA, also known as the Directions for Test Administration, removing any device or material that could jeopardize the content in the testing environment, viewing of test items only by the student taking the test, and certified licensed and trained test administrator administering the assessment, ensuring a secure, quiet test-taking environment, void distractions, and one does not permit other students to hear item responses, and making sure that the same computer, laptop, or tablet, or other devices are used during testing. This ensures that security of materials is maintained. So again, MSAA is a secure statewide assessment in the District of Columbia, and test security needs to be followed at its utmost. Although there is flexibility as far as how MSAA can be started and stopped, and how many times the student can log in, it still needs to follow test security guidelines throughout the test administration and make sure that the student is in a secure environment. And remember that MSAA is a one-to-one administration. So it's also key to remember that it should only be one student per time per one test administrator when taking the assessment. So we've talked a lot about this already, but just want to highlight that the DTAs, the Direction for Test Administration, are secure materials. TA should revert to the DTA and the TAM for all directions regarding test administration. So when you are actually administering the assessment, you will need to reference your DTA the entire time. Each DTA is specific to the form of that test that is assigned to that student, and you should read the directions, passages, and items options exactly as written from the DTA. So again, print these items, print these directions, they're secure, make sure that you have them in a secure location at all times, and follow them verbatim when administering the assessment. So here is a screenshot of what the platform looks like once you actually get into it. So you'll start seeing students' names, their USI, and the assessment that they're assigned to. TAs can have one student, they can only have one student test open at a time. Always pause and save a student's test when taking a break. And also just remember that MSAA is browser-based, and so there's no login required. You just need to log into the computer and enter the MSAAassessment.org site, and this will take you to that assessment for the students. As you can see in the screenshot, under the actions features, you can go to the student's profile, you can start the test, open the test in a PDF. That's what I referenced earlier. So if a student needs a paper-based, open it in a PDF, you can print that. And then you also have your directions for test administration that we've been referencing throughout. So as we talked about earlier, accommodations are used throughout this assessment. There are accommodations that you need to identify in the accommodation section before administering the assessment, but also know that accommodations on the student's IEP are also available on the assessment. As a reminder, accommodations are changes to the standard administration of an assessment that do not alter the construct being measured. Accommodations must be listed in the student's IEP prior to testing. And also, a key distinction to remember is that physical prompting, such as hand over hand, is not allowed on the assessment. So students need to be able to provide you with the specific response. They need to be able to manipulate the mouse themselves, or if they are unable to do so, you can manipulate the mouse, but they have to be able to point to the answer or verbally tell you the answer that they want to select. So hand over hand prompting is not allowed during this assessment. So again, once you receive your TAM, you print your TAM, review all of the accommodations, but just know that accommodations are also allowed on the assessment as long as they are listed in the student's IEP. Test coordinators during the assessment should use the test status summary tab to monitor the total number of math and ELA tests that have been completed. TC should monitor the completed tests throughout the administration to ensure that all testing will be completed by the test window closure date. So this is just a feature for those school test coordinators or those LEA test coordinators to make sure that they can use this feature to ensure that test administrators are on track for completing all tests. As a reminder, students must submit all tests by April 29th. Here's just a screenshot of what it looks like and how you can view that. You will dive into the organization. So your specific organization will be your school specifically, and then you can see and filter by student's name, USI, just to check on their status to see how much they've completed. During the administration, it is important to monitor and report all test irregularities or incidences that may occur. So the test administrator that is administering the assessment reports any irregularities or incidents to the school test coordinator. The school test coordinator will then report those irregularity or incidences to the LEA test coordinator, and the LEA test coordinator will file that and report those to OSSI by filing an incident report. So again, if you come across any testing irregularities or incidences while administering the MSAA, make sure you follow this chain of procedures, and that the LEA test coordinator reports any incidences or irregularities to OSSI. All right, so let's take a moment to address any questions. Stephanie, are there any questions in the chat?
Yes, there's just some questions about the difference between MSAA and DLM, and I think that is something that might be a more common question for non-publics who have students who may be in Maryland. In DC, MSAA is the ELA and math alternate assessment, and DLM we only use for science, but in other states they may use DLM for all of the content areas. So just noting that in DC, the student population that takes MSAA and DLM are the same. It just depends on the content area that they're being assessed in. And there's a couple of questions about access to the platform, but I think those have been handled between folks. And then there's a question about, in general, about test administration in terms of allowable accommodations, and concern that only that hand over hand is not allowed on the assessment, and that's something that is done in instruction. And I think that this may be something that needs to be talked about offline. So
yeah, okay. So if there is a concern, so I'll just say that hand over hand is a consortium policy that is not allowed. So any state that is participating in MSAA, which DC is a part of, that is a consortium level policy that is administered. But if your LEA has specific questions about that, and maybe something that's been talked about during instruction, you can reach out to me, or you can reach out to OSSI.assessment, and we can discuss this further. All right, so if there are no additional questions in that section, we will transition.
Hey, Michael, this is Thomas. Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
Can you maybe speak about the student response check? That might answer the question.
Sure. Okay. So, and this is a portion. So what Thomas is referring to is the SRC. So the student response check is what you also learn about that when you take the training. So basically, it is the student's mode of communication. So if a student has no means of communication. So if the test administrator is trying to administer the assessment, but the student is unable to respond to the item types, or they are not able to provide they're not able to verbally provide a response or even physically provide a response to the paper assessment or the computer-based assessment, then the test administrator will administer the student's response check to check their mode of communication. If the student is unable to do so, then the test administrator will end the assessment. So that's something you will learn about when you print and view the TAM, as well as when you take the training. So that may address what you're referring to if you're using hand over hand in the classroom, but there is no mode of communication for that student specifically. All right, so our last section will be after testing procedures. All right, so again, touched on this earlier, but as a reminder, all tests must be submitted by April 29th. TAs must submit all tests at the end of each testing session. All in-progress tests must be closed and switch to submitted. So this is just a screenshot of what it looks like when the student reaches the end of the test session. You see submit sessions. If you're not submitting, you will hit save and exit. If the student needs to come back in an hour, come back the next day. But at the end of the testing window, you need to make sure that all tests have been submitted by using the submit session button. Test administrators must complete the after test accommodation section. So similarly to the before testing accommodations, you must complete the section about what accommodations were used after testing. Again, these are some accommodations that are listed, but this is more data that is collected by the consortium. It's also important to complete the end of test survey. This is every test administrator must complete an end of test survey for all tested students. The survey provides information about student engagement with the test functions for standards with unique needs, for students with unique needs, and the state content standards. So basically, this provides the consortium with more information about how the student engaged with the test to make sure that each year there is a test that is allowable for students with significant cognitive disabilities, and to make sure that the students are actually engaging and are able to reflect what they know on a statewide assessment. Again, this is at the bottom is just a screenshot of what it looks like. You'll have each individual student name, and you go into the actions button, and then you go to survey, which is the end of test survey. Secure materials. All secure materials should be returned to the test coordinator, and the test coordinator should shred those materials on your school level. The only secure materials that you will have will be the DTAs, or if you printed a PDF version of the test, you need to make sure that you give those to the test coordinator so they can be securely shredded. And lastly, test coordinators must submit a signed test integrity affidavit to the LEA test coordinator within 10 days of completing the MSAA administration. So again, school-based test coordinators must submit the signed test integrity affidavit to the LEA test coordinator, and the LEA test coordinator submit that to OSSE, and that will be submitted to our OSSE test coordinator, Lavinia. And here's our contact information here. But again, there's more information. You'll find out more information about that through your test security training as well. All right, so we have come to the end of our test administrator and test coordinator training for MSAA. We'll stop to take a minute to review the chat and answer any questions that we can at this time. Or if you feel like you would like to come off mute, feel free.
Hi, Michael. I have a student who is going to take the MSAA, and he has magnification and large print edition.
Mhm.
Do we have to do the paper since large print edition is there, or is it okay to just use the magnification?
So it is okay to use a magnification, and then once you download the TAM, you'll also see that it is okay to project to a smartboard as well.
Oh,
So,
okay.
yeah, whatever. So that's a perfect example of the flexibility of the types of accommodation that students require for this assessment. So there's no need to order or download the paper version. You can use a magnification on the computer or connect to a smartboard.
Thank you. I also have a question. I know that for MSAA, the accommodations have to be listed in the student's IEP. Is it the same way for DLM? I can't remember. I feel like DLM, they allow you at least to give all students a reader.
So I'm not as familiar with
Okay.
the DLM accommodations, but I know for OSCE and statewide assessment, all accommodations need to be listed in the student's IEP. So
Okay.
that's the safest way to answer that question.
Okay, thank you.
There are a couple questions in the chat, just again about access to the slides, and the slides and this recording will be posted to OSCE's website in the next couple of days.
Mhm.
And then a question about submitting tests, and the question is, will tests submit automatically at the end of the window if test administrator forgets to click submit?
No, they would not. Great question. So the test coordinator, your job is to ensure that all tests have been submitted. So there should be no tests in progress status at the end of the test window, because a student will not be counted. That test will not be counted. So the test coordinator, your job is to double check and make sure that all test administrators have submitted their tests.
And then additional question about the access to the assessment portal, and I believe that's coming toward the end of February.
Correct. So again, LEA test coordinators will receive access to their account in the MSAA system. They will receive an email from Cognia. Cognia is the testing vendor. Please open that email because it expires within 24 hours of receipt, and that's when test coordinators, LEA test coordinators, will create their account.
Hey, Michael, I just want to make a quick announcement for DCPS MSAA test coordinators. So I'm Thomas Vu. I'm the district coordinator for DCPS schools for MSAA. I will not have access to make accounts until the end of February, which means that if you are a new MSA coordinator for DCPS and you currently do not have an account, I will make you an account at the end of February, and the expectation is that school test coordinators make your TAs, your test administrator accounts. Now, if you were a returning MSA test coordinator and you already have access to the MSA system, please feel free to start making accounts for your TAs now. I'm only making new accounts for new TCs, or if you lost access, I can probably help you find your access to your account. But feel free to start making accounts now. Sorry, and thank you for letting me explain that.
Yeah, and no problem, Thomas. And also the caveat to that is that even if you are returning test coordinator from MSAA test coordinator on the school level, you still won't have access to the platform until the 25th. So either way, you can't get into the MSAA system until February 25th.
And there's also an additional question about DLM in the chat. So for students who test science, will access to DLM be provided in MSAA account? And I can take this one, Michael.
Okay.
The MSAA and DLM portals are two separate. They're two separate vendors, two separate portals. So access for DLM is managed. For your LEA, it may be the same person, but it's a completely different system. So you'll have to have a separate account for DLM. And I would encourage you to reach out to your LEA test coordinator for more information about getting a DLM portal account.
Who manages the DLM for DC if we have questions about that?
At OSSI, the contact is Chelsea Charland.
Okay.
I'll put her email in the chat.
Oh, thank you.
Hi, this is Kathy Dunn again from Maryland. I have a question. How do you access Canvas? When I try to go in, I need a DC password, sign in DC, and I have no access. So who do I contact?
This must be an LEA specific question because at OSSI, we do not use Canvas.
Okay. All right, I can reach out to the LEA. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, so if there are no additional questions, right now, if you think of anything, you can reach out to ossi.assessments@dc.gov, or you can contact the number listed here. This is my number. You can contact me directly. But I want to thank you all for participating in today's MSAA Test Administrator and Test Coordinator training. Again, any questions, feel free to reach out to OSSI directly. Thank you so much.